Yes, so my poor don't bust out to finally Ibrahim Traore expose the African leader who betrayed M.Gadafi. All of una know Ibrahim Traore now the president of Burkina Faso, or now the leader of Burkina Faso. Anywhere you put him, the lead Burkina Faso. He don't expose, he don't call out the name of African leader where betray M.Gadafi. Now Africa, they betray Africa. Watch this video. Hit the comment section with your opinion. Hit the like button. Start Facebook will recommend this video to everybody. Share the video because normally it's about to get down.
Why is it that every time a revolutionary leader arises in Africa, the West always finds a way to eliminate such a leader? But this is not even the worst part. The worst part is that there is always another African leader that the West would use to betray that revolutionary leader. Recently, a dark truth has been revealed about the African leader who betrayed the iconic leader of Libya, M.Gadafi. Gaddafi had a grand vision to create a United States of Africa with one currency, one government, and one army. He had the resources and the will to make it happen. And we believe that he would have achieved this dream. Unfortunately, his ambition was cut short by NATO and France. But the worst part is that he was betrayed by a fellow African leader, someone who he once called a friend. In this video, we will unveil the identity of this African leader and reveal even more shocking truths about Gaddafi's death. In 2014, during a Pan-African Parliament meeting, President Museveni in his address explained how NATO assassinated Muammar Gaddafi, one of the greatest advocates of Pan-Africanism. In his speech, President Museveni stated in his speech that they didn't listen to us, they continued and killed Gaddafi, and now Libya is in shambles up to today. In another speech in 2021, Museveni spoke extensively about the impact of the Libyan crisis post-Gaddafi on the wider northwestern and sub-Saharan Africa region. According to Museveni, it was wrong that people he referred to as arrogant, irresponsible aggressors had gone against an African Union position to attack and oust Gaddafi. He also bemoaned how easily Gaddafi abandoned the capital Tripoli when fighting broke out back in 2011.
The situation in Libya was created by the arrogant and irresponsible actions of some actors that took actions that were against the express position of the African Union. I can reveal to you that those actors had a narrow escape. When some actors started attacking Libya against the decision of the African Union, I contacted His Excellency Jacob Zuma of South Africa and proposed that African armies that so decided to intervene in Libya and confront and teach a lesson to those aggressors who were let down by Muammar Gaddafi, who abandoned Tripoli without a fight. Although at that time I did not have direct link with Muammar Gaddafi, I advised his envoy, who came to see me here, to turn Tripoli into a Stalingrad.
With all this, you would think that this man is a stronger supporter and ally of Muammar Gaddafi. Well, he was until he betrayed him. In fact, it was Museveni that proposed to the US to intervene in Libya. No one knew about this until a leaked document revealed the shocking truth. But what happened exactly? Libya and Uganda had long been allies even before Museveni came to power. Muammar Gaddafi supported Museveni's predecessor Idi Amin to the very end until he was ousted by the coalition forces of Uganda rebels and the Tanzanian military in 1979. When Museveni was waging war against former Ugandan President Milton Obote's second administration, it was to Gaddafi that he turned for military support. Gaddafi supported him, and that was the start of their political friendship. However, this friendship began to turn sour. No one knew when it began to break, but everyone close to the issue could agree that it had to do with Gaddafi's ambition. Gaddafi was a true Pan-African who proposed the notion of a United States of Africa with one currency, one government, and one army. But most African leaders, including Museveni, did not share his idea, although they were reluctant to admit it. In fact, Gaddafi once publicly disagreed with Museveni over the pace of a possible United States of Africa. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can get more videos like this. The tensions between the two continued to grow until March 2008, when Gaddafi visited Kampala to launch the Grand Mosque that bears his name. There, in scenes that would shock diplomats and excite spectators, Gaddafi's male guards clashed with Museveni's security men. So bitter were the exchanges that, in the end, Gaddafi's convoy left Kampala in a huff, as if in flight. 4 years later, Gaddafi was assassinated by NATO. While the US had its own reason for killing Gaddafi, which we will reveal much later, it was President Museveni that gave the US an opening. According to a leaked document from WikiLeaks, Museveni has always been close to the US, so much so that he betrayed Gaddafi and Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe to the Americans. It would interest you to know that it was after the fight in 2008 that Museveni had with Gaddafi that he reported Gaddafi to the US. The leaked documents revealed that Museveni told US Assistant Secretary of State for Africa Gadafi Fraser that Gaddafi was a problem for Africa because he wanted to unite the continent under one president. Imagine that. This was someone that Gaddafi freely provided hundreds of millions of dollars to his regime and even supplied him with weapons while he was fighting for power in Uganda. But that's not all. He also told the US that the best way to undermine Zimbabwe's Mugabe was to attack him on his country's economic performance. In fact, from all indications and based on the WikiLeaks documents, President Museveni might just be a CIA agent who ratted on other African leaders. He is similar to Congolese dictator Mobutu, who ruled the Congo from 1960 to 1997 when he was deposed. It would interest you to know that Mobutu became a CIA agent in 1959, 1 year before Congo's independence from Belgium, and the US backed him for 37 years. Museveni also told the US ambassador that Gaddafi continues to intimidate small African countries through bribes and other pressure. As a result of Libya's actions, small West African countries have been afraid to participate fully or speak out during international meetings at the United Nations, the African Union, and other forums. But ironically, the same Museveni is notorious for traveling around Uganda with brown bags stuffed with cash to buy votes and political and religious leaders. This is a clear case of the pot calling the kettle black. Aside from reporting on Gaddafi, Museveni also reported on Zimbabwe's Mugabe, told Assistant Secretary Fraser that he'd spoken with Mugabe by phone after the 2008 election when challenger Morgan Tsvangirai won 47% to Mugabe's 43%, forcing him into a runoff, which the challenger abandoned, citing regime violence. During his call, Mugabe told Museveni he was confident he would win in the second round of elections. Mugabe told Museveni he did not want election monitors from countries that were hostile to Zimbabwe, but wouldn't mind observers from other countries. In response, Fraser told Museveni that she believed thousands of monitors were necessary, especially in rural areas, to encourage people to vote in Zimbabwe. This is again ironic given the fact that President Museveni, who was discussing the possibility of sending thousands of monitors to Zimbabwe, has always and continues to oppose them in Uganda's elections. Museveni also had another suggestion for the US about how to undermine Mugabe's government. According to the documents, Museveni thought Zimbabwe's faltering economy and Mugabe's poor understanding of the private sector were at the root of Zimbabwe's political problems. He said a discussion of the economy would provide an entry point to tell Mugabe that he has failed and is embarrassing liberation leaders. He noted that Mugabe is unwilling to take calls from most African leaders saying they are not his age mates. With all this, it is clear that the Ugandan president is a snake. In public, he claims that he's a pan-African nationalist, but in private, he has behaved like an African turncoat. It was with the help of African leaders like Museveni that the West was able to paint a negative picture of Gaddafi for a long time. They called him a dictator and eccentric, but the reality was anything but that. Known for his extravagance, Gaddafi boasted a security detail of female bodyguards, lavish outfits, and long dramatic speeches. He also transformed Libya from one of the poorest countries on earth into a rich, self-sufficient state, all while managing a tribal society in a country home to the largest oil reserves in Africa. During his 42 years in power, he increased the country's literacy rate from 25% to 88%. Libyans enjoyed free healthcare, free education, and a high standard of living. Basic necessities such as electricity and gas were cheap, and the country was guaranteed a strong social safety net and welfare programs. Libya is 90% desert. Gaddafi sought to provide fresh water to all Libyans for consumption and agriculture, an endeavor in which he succeeded. He built the world's largest irrigation project, the Great Man-Made River, in the 1980s. Boasting the world's largest pipe network, it provides 70% of all the fresh water in Libya. Gaddafi called it the eighth wonder of the world. Costing over $25 billion, the project was entirely self-financed, without any loans or credits from foreign Western banks. Libya had grown to be a very wealthy country and had no external debt. How can a leader like this be called a dictator? But alas, thanks to the betrayal of Museveni, NATO bombed the Great Man-Made River in July 2011, destroying key civilian infrastructure. Doesn't this count as a war crime? In 2010, Libya was ranked number 1 in Africa and 53rd out of 189 countries and territories. Today, its ranking has sunk from 53rd to 105th worldwide. After the NATO-backed revolution, Libya has none of these nice things anymore. There are constant power cuts. The healthcare system has collapsed. There is no infrastructure. The standard of living has plummeted. And after 10 years, Libya doesn't even have a functioning central government. Essentially, Libya has become a failed state. Instead of an abundance of water, gold, and oil in a thriving country with great infrastructure, Libya now has open slave trade markets. Smugglers and human traffickers take advantage of migrants and refugees passing through to Europe, selling them off into bondage. Rival tribes and political factions fight over oil and other precious resources, determined to seize power for themselves. Meanwhile, pockets of Islamic State and other jihadist fighters lurk in the shadows, plaguing the war-torn country and its neighbors. These groups wouldn't have dared establish a presence in Gaddafi's Libya. One of Gaddafi's best speeches was in 2008 in Damascus at a meeting of the Arab League. Rebuking the violent invasion of Iraq, he offered Arab leaders a stark reminder of what befell Saddam Hussein, whom the US once considered an ally against Iran.
كان يدمروا في العراق صديق حميم لصدام حسين واخيرا باعوه وشنقوه. حتى انتم اصدقاء امريكا، نحن اصدقاء امريكا، بلاش نقول انتم، نحن اصدقاء امريكا كلنا. قد توافق امريكا على شنقنا في يوم ما.
Chuckling at his words, other Arab leaders would have done well to take heed of Gaddafi's warning, for indeed the US would come for Syria and Libya next. And just 3 years later, Gaddafi himself would be brutally killed at the hands of NATO-backed rebels. But why did NATO want him out? It's simple. Gaddafi was an anti-imperialist, pan-Arabist, and pan-African. He supported independence and national liberation movements right across the world, including groups such as the Palestine Liberation Organization, the Irish Republican Army, the Black Panther Party, and many more. In the 1970s, he tried to merge Libya with Egypt and Syria to form a unified Arab state. In 2009, he proposed that African nations adopt a single currency, the gold dinar. The Libyan central bank, which was 100% state-owned, had reserves of 144 tons of gold that he intended to use for this purpose. Gaddafi proposed that African countries buy and sell their resources exclusively in this new pan-African currency. This would enable them to transition away from the US dollar and the Central Africa CFA franc, a colonial currency used in 14 countries and controlled entirely by France. This was Gaddafi's biggest sin. In wanting African nations to adopt a single currency, to control their own resources and have true independence, he posed a threat to Western monetary hegemony, so he had to go. It was as simple as that. Leaked emails of then US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton show discussions around Gaddafi's gold reserves and his plans for a single currency. One of the emails read in part from Hillary Clinton's private email server stated that Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount in silver. This gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan gold dinar. This plan was designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc, CFA. According to knowledgeable individuals, this quantity of gold and silver is valued at more than $7 billion. French intelligence officers discovered this plan shortly after the current rebellion began. and this was one of the factors that influenced President Nicolas Sarkozy's decision to commit France to the attack on Libya. According to these individuals, Sarkozy's plans are driven by the following issues. 1. A desire to gain a greater share of Libya oil production. 2. Increase French influence in North Africa. 3. Improve his internal political situation in France. 4. Provide the French military with an opportunity to reassert its position in the world. And 5. Address the concern of his advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plans to supplant France as the dominant power in Francophone Africa. Conspicuously absent is any mention of humanitarian concerns. The objectives, therefore, are money, power, and oil. In 2011, French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly described Libya's leader as a threat to global financial security. But how could a tiny country of 6 million people represent such a threat just because Gaddafi wants to establish an independent African currency? In the words of Canadian professor Maximilien Forte, put it in his heavily researched book, Slouching Towards Sirte, NATO's War on Libya and Africa, the goal of U.S. military intervention was to disrupt an emerging pattern of independence and a network of collaboration within Africa that would facilitate increased African self-reliance. This is at odds with the geostrategic and political economic ambitions of extra-continental European powers, namely the U.S. In simple terms, Gaddafi's plan would weaken the Western monopoly over African resources in the international banking system, rendering neo-colonial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund less effective in manipulating developing nations. Not surprisingly, the West didn't want this to happen. Interestingly, Gaddafi foresaw this in 2011 when he said, "There is a conspiracy to control Libyan oil and to control Libyan land, to colonize Libya once again." Unfortunately, he didn't have enough protection to save himself. Nothing could be more emblematic of how evil the entire affair is than Hillary Clinton literally jumping for joy on hearing of Gaddafi's demise after he was brutally sodomized, lynched, and executed by NATO-backed rebels. "We came, we saw, he died," she said. Western analysts love dismissing the achievements of other countries and labeling their leaders dictators. But the truth is, Libya was much better off under Gaddafi. It had oil, gold, water, and resource independence. History is littered with African, Arab, and Latin leaders killed by the United States for daring to make their countries better and seeking to challenge Western hegemony. Gaddafi is no exception. There is nothing the West hates more than an Arab leader who opposed imperialism, Zionism, and wants his country and other Arab and African countries to be self-sufficient. That is why NATO murdered Gaddafi. One thing common in all these assassinations by the West is the fact that there is always one African ready to betray the great leader. It happened with Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Libya's Gaddafi. The situation is honestly pathetic. Hopefully nothing of such would happen with President Traoré of Burkina Faso. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below.